Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 8. We're going to be starting in verse 8 this lesson. But before we begin, our theme verse for Lunch with the Lord is Jeremiah 15 verse 16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we begin here in verse 8, we saw last lesson that the children of Israel come to Samuel and they want Samuel to make them a king. Samuel is offended and he's hurt because of all the years that he served them under God and delivered them from the Philistines and these things. And the children of Israel don't like the prospects of possibly one of his sons taking over when he dies, because Samuel now is old and his sons are corrupt. They churn judgment, they take bribes, and the children of Israel are looking into the future saying, when Samuel dies, we don't want one of his sons taking over. So instead of asking Samuel what's going to happen and having Samuel seek God's heart as to what God is going to do when he dies, they just come to him and they basically tell him, you make us a king. So now, like I said, Samuel now is hurt, but God is telling him it's not, don't take it personally, it's against me. So now we start in verse 8 where God is continuing to talk to Samuel, and he says here, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto you. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, but yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the kind of king that shall reign over them. Now, in verse 8, God is basically saying that he has had to put up with their ingratitude since he brought them up out of the land of Egypt. All that time was nothing but rebellion and idol worship. God sent messengers and deliverers to them, but they would not listen to them. They wouldn't listen. Again, even as they wandered in the wilderness, there were a number of Israelites who were worshiping idols. Now, Samuel is just getting a small taste of what God has had to deal with for the past several hundred years. In verse 9, God in his grace is still trying to plead to them to stay with him, to be their king. But this time, God wants them to be warned about what it will be like to have an earthly king over them. Now, in verses 10 through 18, the description of this king is not the one that God will actually give to them, but it's a general description of what worldly kings are like. Now, whether the children of Israel realize it or not, this is what having an earthly king will be like. It may not be much different than having Gentile kings rule over them. The only kind of good king was described to Rehoboam by the old men who stood in Solomon's presence. When King Solomon died, the old men that stood in Solomon's presence and heard his wisdom, now they stand before Rehoboam, and they are going to give counsel to Rehoboam as to what kind of a king he should be like. And this is what they counsel, and they say in 1 Kings chapter 12 and verse 7, and they say, if you will be a servant to this people this day, and will serve them, and answer them, and speak good words unto them, then they will be your servants forever. And this was probably the greatest counsel that Rehoboam or any of the kings could have gotten if they would have just done it. But did he? No. And that's why the kingdom split into two kingdoms. Jesus is the king of all kings. He's the king of this universe. But what did he say? What did he say to the disciples? He says, I am among you as what? As one that serves. I am among you as one that serves. There is no king higher than Jesus. And yet Jesus said, I am among you as your servant. People will give their lives for their leader if their leader gives his life for the people. The history of the kings of the southern kingdom of Judah were not as bad as Samuel will describe here in verses 10 to 18. But this was only because these kings had to some degree a fear of God in their mind. Without God, it would have been far worse. Like the northern kingdom of Israel, which did not have one good king at all. So it could have gone bad for the southern kingdom, but they did have a couple of kings like David, like Jehoshaphat, like Josiah, a couple of kings, Asa, that were good kings. They served God, and they wanted God and to be over them. And so they did rule with a godly heart. But the northern kingdom, they didn't have one good godly ruler. And because of that, they went into captivity about 120 years earlier, about 115 years earlier than the southern kingdom did. Now, verses 10 through 18, let's read that, and then I'll say a few words on it. Verses 10 through 18 deal with God's description of what kings can be like. So he says here, and Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people, and that asked of him for a king. And he said, this will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He shall take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen. And some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint him captains over thousands and captains over 50s. And he will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he will take your fields, and your vineyards, and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed, and of your vineyards, and give to his officers, and to his servants. And he will take your men servants, and your maid servants, and your goodliest young men, and your donkeys, and put them to his work. And he will take the tenth of your sheep, and you shall be his servants. And you shall cry out in that day because of your king, which you shall have chosen. What? And the last part of verse 18 says what? And the Lord will not hear you in that day. Now, if you want something, you have to be willing to pay the price for that thing. The price described in these verses is a very high price for the children of Israel to pay. Now, 6 times in these verses do we see the word take. Every form of government needs support from its people. And the way it's supported is how? By the government taking taxes, taking whatever. I mean, if you have a government, every form of government in the world has to support itself, and it supports itself by taking from the people. In these verses, there are 12 things mentioned that their king could take from them to establish his government. From sons and daughters, to sheep and donkeys, to fields and olive yards, even to the seeds that they use for planting. Earthly kings are not so much in the business of giving, but of taking. And when you have a person who has a sinful nature, as everyone else does, it could turn out bad. That government could turn out bad, and it could also turn out bad for its people. The sense of security and leadership could quickly turn to a heavy yoke of bondage. In verse 18, God tells them that if they persist on having a king and then it goes bad for them, then when they cry out to him for help, God says, I'm not going to hear you. Why? Because you have your chance right now to decide for me and to take me as your king. God says, I'm the one who brought you out of Egypt. I'm the one that provided for you in the wilderness, brought you through the Jordan River into the promised land. I'm the one who defeated all these kings in the promised land to give you the land, and to defeat the Philistines and other nations, and to bless you. God says, I'm your king. And problem is that they want an earthly king, one they can see and feel and touch and have. So here the situation is God says, if this is what you want, well then if it goes bad for you when you cry out, I'm not going to hear you. Basically, God is saying that God is going to let them reap what they sow. This is what they want. Well, God says this is what you'll get then. All right, we're going to continue on in verse 19 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.